final say over what was in and what wasn't. So it could have been different if that wasn't the case. But he was actually fairly open about his competitive streak, almost like a psychological competitive streak. He was very open about that and about, how he would ride some guys harder than others because he wanted them to be up to his level. But that was an incredible documentary. The music cuts in it were amazing. I wish that there was a legitimate soundtrack for it.
Maybe that's coming on down the line.
I hope so. I'll keep looking for it. But I was really like blown away by the music choices, and I think there was God, what is it? I think it's the 8th episode over, I think, like the 96 finals.
Mm-hmm.
Where there was this incredible cover of Teardrop by Massive Attack.
Mm-hmm.
By, I think it was Jose Gonzalez who did it. But when I heard that, like, I was almost in tears because it's such a good cover, and with what was going on with what they were showing, what was happening in the last part of that episode was like super emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those tracks where I was like, man, I wish that there was an official soundtrack for it. So hopefully that comes out. I think the guy who did it, I don't know his name, so I can't shout him out by name, but he did another 30 for 30. He must be a Chicago native, because he did another 30 for 30 a few years ago on the 85 Chicago Bears, like Super Bowl team. That was fantastic. That brought me to tears at the end because of the Buddy Ryan stuff and the relationship that a lot of these players had with Buddy Ryan, who was the defensive coordinator. And the way that special ends is super emotional too. So I think that guy's a Chicago native. It's pretty safe to say because he did the Jordan documentary as well. That was great. So I think that's available on Netflix now. I think that was supposed to come out with the NBA Finals in June, and because everything got thrown into disarray, and because people were home and there wasn't like a lot to do, ESPN released that in the spring instead. And if you haven't seen it, I believe it is on Netflix. Please go check it out. Even if you're not a basketball fan per se, I think you would really enjoy it.
Yeah, I watched it, and I thought it was great.
It's so good.
Yeah, as a kid, I was a big Jordan fan. I was really into the Bulls, that whole dynasty, so it was interesting to, like you said, kind of dive back into some of those memories and relive a lot of that.
Yeah, like especially in the early 90s, when they did the three-peat in the early 90s, because that was my junior high years and I was playing basketball at the time. So, like, I remember watching, those games, and especially the finals, each of those times. And it was crazy. It brought me back to being a 12, 13-year-old kid.
Scottie Pippen, dude.
Scottie Pippen was one of the most underrated players, and the documentary really digs into it. He did not get paid like he should have. And it's really unfortunate. Let's see, what else? It's on Netflix as well. I think it was just a 3-episode miniseries. Have you ever heard of a miniseries called 5 Came Back?
No.
When World War II broke out, there were 5 prominent working film directors at the time that joined the service and went overseas as documentarians. And they shot a lot of war footage and documentaries for the war, and kind of films trying to get people to sign up, like Why We Fight type films.
Yeah.
And those directors were John Huston, who did The Maltese Falcon, did a bunch of like really great Humphrey Bogart films. John Ford, who did a lot of the John Wayne westerns. Frank Capra, who directed It's a Wonderful Life, which I mentioned last week, and a lot of those movies with Jimmy Stewart. William Wyler, who made a great post-war movie called The Best Years of Our Lives that deals with soldiers returning from war. George Stevens, who directed Shane, which is a really good Western, which is another one of my Turner Classic Movie finds. Also directed Giant with James Dean and Elizabeth Taylor. It was these 5 directors that went off and, joined the war effort. And their stories are related through 5 current modern film directors, and that's Francis Ford Coppola, Paul Greengrass, Guillermo del Toro, Steven Spielberg, and Lawrence Kasdan. They all profile these 5 old Hollywood directors that went off, and just the footage that a lot of these directors captured, like they put themselves in danger. I want to say it was John Ford. It might have been Frank Capra. Lost their hearing pretty badly at one point. Maybe it was George Stevens. I wish I could remember. But because they were around, the big guns, the machine guns inside of an airplane, which is super loud, and if you don't have any kind of ear protection, you can lose your hearing. I believe John Huston was wounded. But just seeing like the war footage that they were able to capture. George Stevens was at Dachau when that camp was liberated, and just like what he saw was just what he saw, and what he documented at the concentration camp was like horrifying. I can't imagine seeing any of that in real life and being able to go home and go to sleep at night and not think about just the horror and the brutality that you saw in a concentration camp. And just the miniseries is so well done, and just seeing what these guys went through and what they were able to capture on film was amazing. And hearing these modern directors talk about them was pretty great. I highly recommend that. I think it's only three episodes. It's called 5 Came Back. That you can find on Netflix. And another miniseries that I brought up with you, I think before we were recording, that was on HBO in the spring, which was a scary time and a scary miniseries, was called The Plot Against America, which is based on the Philip Roth novel, which I believe was written in the George Bush years. And it kind of presents this alternate version of history where Charles Lindbergh, who is known for flying across the Atlantic solo in, I want to say 1917. That's what he was known for, but if you don't know, he was also a Nazi sympathizer when the Nazis started taking power. He was an America First guy. This miniseries presents this alternate version of history where he wins the presidency over Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it's from the perspective of this one Jewish family, and with Lindbergh taking power and wanting to keep America out of the war in Europe, even though it was very clear by then what was happening and what was going on. I mean, FDR kept us out of the war a little bit longer than he should have, because it was really the attack on Pearl Harbor that launched us into World War II, and not what was going on in Europe for the previous 3 years. But as Lindbergh takes power, the country turns towards fascism, turns towards xenophobia, and granted that this was written during the Bush presidency years, it very much became of the moment because of the Trump years and the road that we had started to head down with Trump at the helm. So it was a very frightening and kind of somber look at we could be headed in this direction. I think it was only 6 episodes, but the penultimate episode is probably one of the most gut-wrenching and heartbreaking hours of television I've ever seen. And the final episode might be one of the tensest hours of television I've ever seen. But that came from David Simon, who is one of my favorite writers and one of my favorite showrunners. He just finished up The Deuce last year, which I know that we were both fans of. He did Treme, he did The Wire, he did a great miniseries on the Iraq War called Generation Kill. So he's HBO's kind of go-to prestige guy that they'll put on whatever he comes out with, and whatever he comes out with has always been fantastic. The Wire is one of my favorite TV shows. So this Plot Against America came from David Simon, who adapted it for HBO. So I highly recommend that. You could probably watch it and breathe a little bit easier now that the election has been settled, and we're turning away from what Trump was creating. But watching that in the spring, it was not an easy watch, and it gave me anxiety just watching it, especially those last 2 episodes. So if that's on HBO Max, which it should be, I highly recommend checking that out. Just a couple of shows I like to shout out that I did a rewatch of was I rewatched Key and Peele.
Oh yeah.
For the first time since it had gone off the air, and I've always loved that show. Loved it even more on the rewatch. And then I kind of forgot, like, how many of those sketches are pretty dark. Like, they take, like, a dark turn. And you can kind of see, like, where Jordan Peele is laying that groundwork for the 2 movies that he's directed so far. Is because it kind of seems funny at first, and then, like, as it goes on, like, it just gets, like, weirder and scarier. But that was something I really enjoyed going back and revisiting. And then because we were in a very political, I want to say a couple of days or week, but it's been dragged on for a month with Republicans trying to overturn the election now. But I rewatched Veep on HBO because I've always been like a big Julia Louis-Dreyfus fan. And she's great as the vice president in the show. And if you're a fan of just really, like, horrible insults and vulgar dialogue, this is the show for you. If you want to know, like, how to cut someone down to size, this is the show for you. It came from an Italian guy by the name of Armando Iannucci, who had a British sitcom called The Thick of It. That was kind of, it took place like in British politics and was kind of the same vein as Veep. It comes from that guy, and it's just this kind of mean-spirited and nasty as that show was. But like I said, if you're a fan of just really mean-spirited, ugly insults, and